Welcome back, coaches. This is the Football Coaching Podcast. I'm Daniel Chamberlain, co-host, here with Joe Daniel, as always.
What's up, Coach?
It's another beautiful end of football season Tuesday. It is Tuesday.
It is end of football season Tuesday.
We watched the
Official
Super
end
Bowl.
of football season.
Yeah.
Until
Super Bowl was Sunday. Had to watch the Chiefs win yet another one.
Yep.
Monday, I got a surprise, like 10 inches of snow. Nobody to my west got any snow. Nobody to my east got any snow, but we got like 10 inches. So very weird. I was okay with a snow day. The school did not have one because I'm 80 miles from my workplace. So my boss, I think, thought I was lying. I sent pictures and I almost wrecked my truck twice trying to get there. And I was like, nope, I'm going home. Deal with it. But there was 12 to 15 inches of snow buildup on the road. I was like, I can't do this. I'm very sorry. So
I
that's
saw
what we woke
something
up to.
where whoever around here had predicted this was going to be like our worst winter ever. We've had nothing. So maybe that'll come our way and make them look brilliant.
Right.
But the groundhog already said that it was over. So
is that what he said?
Yeah.
Our
groundhog said the spring.
The Oklahoma Wildlife Department said we don't pull no groundhogs out of the ground because they're squirrels and squirrels bite. So
you don't have groundhogs?
I don't know if we do or not. They just don't bite them, or they just don't pull them out because they're afraid to get bitten.
we've got one in Richmond locally, and then we also have the one, Phil up in
is that PA?
Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
main one. He's relatively close. I figure you can still kind of figure out the East Coast weather, but wildly inconsistent apparently, and gets dominated by the Farmer's Almanac. But nobody pays attention to the Farmer's Almanac. They wait for the groundhog.
My dad is a big Farmer's Almanac guy, so maybe I should listen to him. Said no kid ever.
I used to always see it at the like the checkout in the grocery. I don't know if they still have it. Like I don't go, I go to the self checkout. Like I haven't gone to a regular checkout in forever, but that was where I used to always see it. So now I wouldn't even know where to get. I guess a bookstore, which again would be a challenge in and of itself. Wandering into a bookstore. Did we have the conversation about the price of magazines? By the way, before we introduce our guest, I wandered into a bookstore at Barnes and Noble, and one of the things that I get a lot of, I read a lot of business and marketing stuff, and they're like, oh, the magazines. This is a few years ago. You got to look at the magazines, and like not just any magazines, like the women's magazines. So like Cosmopolitan, those have and then also like National Enquirer and stuff have these great headlines and stuff, And so I'm like walking around the bookstore. I think I was killing time or something, and I walked over and I started walking around looking at the magazines. Magazines are, I didn't even know they had that many magazines anymore, but they do. They've got rows and rows of them, but they are like $20, $25. There's like a Taylor Swift, and it says very clearly, it's like, this is the unofficial Taylor Swift magazine. It's like in big letters, proudly, this is the unofficial Taylor Swift, and it's like $32.
Ouch.
There was like a Wine Spectator that was like $18. Now, when you get down to like Time and your normal old school magazines that, and I guess I don't know if Time's monthly or weekly or whatever, but they're like $8 or something, still more than I expected. But I looked at the wrestling magazines and they were like just $15, $12, something like that. So that's my story. Magazines still exist, but are ungodly expensive now.
They just want you to get them online, I think. And even then they're going away. It seems like all of those old-fashioned mediums are slowly dying out. So
yeah, I got on our library has Hoopla or whatever, where you get access to like 50 magazines for free. You get like 7 days of access to them through there online. And even that, I was like, there aren't a lot of magazines that I'd care to look at anymore.
No. I even tried to get the guns and ammo and stuff. And I'm like, this is just the same. I know what guns I'm going to buy. So that's what I'm going to buy. I don't.
Yeah.
I see those. They're all the coolest things, but they're so expensive. I never, ever would I buy those. But
well, and like we can just look it up. Like if we want something now, we can just look it up. Like
that's right.
We don't have to wait for the magazine to come out.
So. Google reviews for
the magazines are a month behind any actual news or anything like that. So yeah, that's my magazine story.
There you go. Well, we will proudly introduce Dr. Samantha Chamberlain back to the show. She's not been around since she made you Google toe yoga. So
I was thinking about the last episode that we did, and that was the first thing that popped in my head was toe yoga.
Yeah.
Toyoga.
I don't.
We got to get their muting down.
Yeah. So I just
they're
got
in the same room.
So
So
she was muted still. So anyway. So yeah. But anyway. So Dr. Samantha Chamberlain, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Well, you already did, but I'm really sad that I don't get to have you Google toe yoga today. So we got to see if there's something else I can get you to Google and besides a real thing. But yeah, I am excited to be here and think it's super awesome how this episode came about. Daniel was at a football coaching conference and someone approached him and asked to have an episode about concussions. So shout out to that coach and super big round of applause for him for caring about his athletes beyond just them being a player on the field.
We're going to figure the muted thing. It's going to be great. It's going to be a great episode, guys. If you hear us just like echoing, we're trying to figure it out. Yeah, well, we're super glad to have you. Obviously, I am, because you're my wife and I can show you off. That's the best part about being married. The concussions is super a big deal, right? We saw them in our season this year. I think every coach, unfortunately, has probably seen that come to be an obstacle they have to deal with in their season. And so what I found this year was that like there's the haves and have-nots, and that's the teams that have resources that take care of that for them. And so you just don't tell them anything. And there's the have-nots that don't have those resources and generally also don't know how to handle those things. So I just thought that it would be a good idea for coaches now, while they can still sell it to their next staff. They can kind of get all this ingrained in their off season and their summer workouts before 7-on-7, before team camps, all that good stuff. Make this a kind of a foundational thing that coaches are aware of and they're using. So I'm pretty excited for that. Joe, before we get started, question one, do you want to pay the bills here, sir?
Always, yes. So check out JoeDanielFootball.com/rules. We have our 40 Coach Simple rules for football coaches that want to win more football games. It is a special report we put together that is a really nice looking PDF document that you'll get to download instant access to. It's going to have 40 different tips, tricks, strategies, tactics that you can use to win more football games this season. Everything from applying that Coach Simple philosophy to your team, pulling levers, identifying your ASCA, identifying your non-negotiables, developing your drills, all of the things that we as football coaches need to be doing that go beyond the just straight up X's and O's lines on paper in order to win football games. So you can get access to that by going to JoeDanielFootball.com/rules.
Awesome. I guess this chance will one last sell for adaptable physical therapy. Well, we'd kind of taken it out of the show notes, but with my wife being here, it's like breaking rules, I think, if you don't pitch it when your wife is on the episode.
Yeah.
So if you're in the Northeast Oklahoma, Northwest Arkansas, even Southwest Missouri, you're probably close enough to come see Dr. Chamberlain over at Adaptable Physical Therapy. What can you expect when you get there is PT 2.0. What that means to you is that you're going to get one-on-one service with right now with Dr. Chamberlain. You're not going to get sit between multiple, PTAs and all that stuff. She's going to know what you've done in the past, what you need to do in the future to continue your plan of care, as doctors like to call it. I think I'm learning all this stuff. She's super big on correctly dosing. One thing I always remember she says is like, if you come in to PT and you're not doing more than your everyday life, if you're just walking around, then you're not getting PT'd, right? You're just paying someone money for no reason. So correct dosing is what you need to recover. So Adaptable PT, Grove, Oklahoma. You can Google us, jump in there and schedule an appointment with Dr. Chamberlain, and she can come do your first consult for free. Mention the podcast and we'll give you a free consult. Why not? So bring your kids in, your wife, your grandma. She helps them all. She's big time into the aging Americans. They're not old. They're just high numbers on the age, right? But it's even if they are old, I guess. Old, not weak is her big saying. So yeah, Adaptable PT.
As a member of the olds. Thank you.
A member of the olds.
Yes, as one of the olds.
So, question one here tonight with bills paid. Maybe. My questions have now messed up, so this is great. We're going to make it work. Here we go. Question 1.
This is like our 1000th episode, and just
everything went to crap all at once. What is a concussion? So we're going to, Dr. Chamberlain, we'll jump to you first here. We're going to call you Sam the rest of the episode. Dr. Chamberlain's super weird. What is a concussion? What are the common signs and symptoms that coaches might see?
All right. So thank you for that lovely pitch of adaptable physical therapy. You do it so well, and I appreciate it every time. But you might be wondering why a physical therapist is telling you about concussions instead of some other provider, or why a coach isn't telling you about it. And it's because with the new, let me back up. In the medical world, a consensus statement came out last year about concussions and how to treat them better and to better serve individuals that have had concussions to have a full recovery and not have lasting side effects like later in life. So PTs are positioned in the best way to treat these because they are very multifaceted and can affect many body systems, and PTs have the ability to treat those. So that's where PT comes in. They used to be 4th or 5th down the chain of what medical provider you might see after having a concussion. And now we need to be 1st or 2nd. So if you're not seeing, like if you don't have an ATC that's seeing you, or you're not getting sent to the ER and you're still having symptoms, just go to your PT. Most states have direct access now, so you can kind of skip that primary care provider group and then move on to actually getting the care that you need instead of hopping from specialist to specialist. So that's why I'm here telling you, it's why I know about concussions, is because really physical therapy is best suited to treat people and recognize symptoms that do need further specialization. So I'm going to give you a really sciencey definition of concussion, and then I'm going to give you the simple version. So a concussion is a traumatic brain injury caused by direct blow to the head, neck, or body, resulting in an impulsive force being transmitted to the brain. It initiates neurotransmitter and metabolic cascade with possible axonal injury, blood flow change, and inflammation affecting the brain. Like I said, super sciencey. Your brain needs energy, it needs blood flow, it needs all these things. And when it has a concussion, it impacts that. So the really simple definition comes from an athletic trainer, a certified athletic trainer. His name is Dustin Fink. He's been practicing a long time. Really good mentor as far as being able to treat and screen for concussion sideline. But his kind of simpler definition is abnormal brain function after a physically traumatic event with or without head contact. So that's the one that I think a lot of people get hung up on, is we expect a hit to the head, and if we don't see that, we're like, oh, they're fine. But it can be a blow to the body that causes whiplash, which can lead enough force to have the brain basically knock inside your skull and have a concussion within your head, and it not have a blow to the head from somebody else or an external source. So that is a concussion. So now that we know what it is, I'm just going to move right along since Daniel had to step out and play daddy role. Reasons why you care about this as a coach or anybody that's involved within a team or even just in care of people. Like our 2-year-old has hit his head entirely too many times this week, but that's a issue for another day. But we care because it is your brain, and obviously you need your brain to function. And repeated injuries start to make day-to-day life more challenging. We're going to go into signs and symptoms, but why this is so important for you as coaches is because it starts having a lasting impact on these kids, and their life goes outside of high school. So they have to live with this brain long into life. And I know there's been a lot in the NFL lately and lots of publicity about concussions and why it's important to catch them. But something that tends to come up is delayed onset symptoms. So those are real. So if you have a kid 2-3 days later that's like, man, I'm having these symptoms, like I'm dizzy or I have a headache or I just don't feel right, is a common one they say. Believe them. They're probably not trying to get out of something, especially if you had noted a hard hit during practice. So those are some things to be looking out for, and we'll look out into more. But I'll let Daniel chime on if he has any questions about concussion definition.
I mean, for me, the biggest thing for us is we normally have somebody, and just some, we'll talk about some different situations. Game night, and almost everywhere that I've been, game night, we have somebody there that's their job. We're aware of it. We're thinking about it during the game. Practice where we don't have somebody there a lot of times. Now, a lot of you do. A lot of you have somebody who is floating. So like we'll have somebody who is there, and they'll be, primarily, and I think it's interesting to talk about the, for example, the non-contact, we'll have somebody who comes and says, hey, our athletic trainer, and not our current athletic trainer. Well, sometimes, but usually she will try to make sure, football is kind of a priority. But a lot of times we'll have people who are like, okay, well, what do you have going on today? It's like, well, we're just special teams, just in helmets. Okay, I'm going to go over to the volleyball practice, or I'm going to go, and then we don't have somebody. But I've been at schools where we didn't have anybody unless it was game day. And if you're a JV coach or a freshman coach, you very well may not have anybody there. So I think even if you have someone on your staff or on your sidelines on game day, we need to be aware of it all the time. And my guess is that the ones that maybe have more likely to have, delayed onset symptoms because we don't notice it at the time, there's not somebody pulling them out of action because we're doing 1,000 different things and running around at practice. My guess is those are the one, that's the time where we need to probably be most aware, is when somebody's not there. And I'm not saying, the day that, not that we're not aware of, but, the day that we are walked through special teams, it's like, it's much less likely, but still possible. But when we have a practice and somebody's not paying that close attention to it, or like I said, you got the JV team, the varsity team, the freshman team, or whoever else, the middle school team, and you got one person that's supposed to be in charge of all of those, you've got to be aware of those things, of what's happening. So we all, and I don't know, Daniel, I assume that you do, and we do the NFHS concussion deal at the beginning of the year. I think most of us have to.
Yeah.
So we're all aware, or we're all supposed to be aware of those things. We're supposed to go through that training every year. We're supposed to be aware of it. Hopefully we are. I mean, I've been going through this for 15 years, and it's like, hopefully we're all not out there being total Neanderthal idiots anymore. I mean, I remember very clearly, I won't name the team and I won't name the coach. He's retired. Sorry, that probably, but I remember very clearly, and this was, this is 10 years ago. I remember very clearly a kid being straight up out of it in our huddle. I mean, he walked to our huddle, stood there for a minute. It's like, hey, buddy. He was really good, by the way. And it was like, hey, buddy, you're in the wrong huddle. Shuffled him out of there, and he came back after halftime. It was like that. That's
going
probably
to the wrong sideline is one of the signs and symptoms.
And that's probably one of the last times that I remember something being that obviously like negligent. And like, I mean, it was pretty clear, but I think most of us are pretty good about it now. But you do, and maybe you've dealt with these situations, Sam. It's like we do get hung up in the moment, and we do kind of want to be like, I don't see anything,
Yeah. Especially when those symptoms are milder or one of the lower, they're not. What's the old? They used to say if you got your bell rung, right? And then you are cool. You just go sit on the bench. It's a good thing that you turned it over anyway, so we're going on defense, so I don't need my starting quarterback. And by the time we get back out there, you're still the guy. Yeah, you were talking about being at practice and like we're going to take it easy today. Part of that is just knowing the history of your players, which every coach should. But once they've had that first or second or third one, man, those things can come on with nothing.
Sure.
I had a junior high track. She wasn't really a star. She was just a track girl my very first year. And she was on her like fourth or fifth concussion. She started it by tripping in the hallway and headbutting a water fountain. That was her first. And then she would get them, like she would do a stunt and cheer. She had to quit cheering because she would give herself concussions doing a backflip. Like just the jolt of hitting the ground, she'd slip into that next one. So she ended up basically having to retire out of sports in, what was that, 7th or 8th grade. It was very, very young. But that's things you don't know about. You don't know the history of your players. Maybe you get an 8th grader and you're not aware. Maybe you're the new coach, whatever it is. But you need to know, because it could be a non-contact day, just as bad as a non-contact ACL tear. It's still an ACL tear. It doesn't matter what your plan was that day.
I think a lot of us are, and I'll let you talk about it. A lot of us are thinking, like, unless it's like straight up old school, like Tom Jackson jacked up hit, like everything's fine. Like, unless we see like a violent collision, we don't think about it. And one of the good things is our kids have gotten a lot better about being like, hey, coach, you might want to check on him. That didn't used to ever happen. That happens now when it more often than it used to. Also, our kids are aware, and I've seen them drag a kid who was essentially knocked out off the field so that he didn't get evaluated. And so we have to watch for for that. So they're hyper aware of all of the concussion stuff too. So we always have to be watching what's happening.
I was going to say that is kind of a, we're talking about game nights even, but there's some people out there that'll misdiagnose, and now you are out a star because they think they saw a symptom of a concussion. So that's another great thing about this episode. I know Sam's about to go into the signs and symptoms you need to be looking out for, because you could save your season if you die, because somebody on the sideline isn't misdiagnosing. We use, we call them IMSA. I don't know, whatever they're called. The first responders, the ambulance people, right? And we were at a game one year and they took a player's helmet and refused to give it back, and the kid was fine. Like, I think Sam might have even evaluated him on the sidelines, like, yes, he can go back in. And they were like, no, we took his helmet. We're in control now. Like, that doesn't make sense. So preparing yourself for that situation as well as just saving yourself professionally, save your own tail legally. Yep. So there's lots of reasons to be well-versed in concussions. But so Sam, if you don't mind, run us through what those common practice or Friday night symptoms might be.
So before I do that, I'm going to touch on the girl that hit her head and then the cheerleading thing. Like, she had to stop cheering because of repeated concussions or giving herself concussion from doing back handsprings or whatever it may have been. That's one of the things that people don't realize is if you encountered a force enough to give yourself a concussion, you've also injured your neck. So it takes less force to have whiplash than it does to have a concussion. So that's when having good neck strengthening, having just overall strength is really going to help you. And we'll get into those preventative measures later on. But if you can't stabilize your head with a simple backflip, then you probably are going to have concussion-like symptoms afterwards because of how much the brain interacts with the neck and all the nerves that go through it to go to the rest of your body. So pretty big time there. As far as signs and symptoms go, like you were saying, if someone's not getting that direct hit, then there are things you need to be looking out for with just those, I got my bell rung. Like, they didn't lose consciousness. They're not on the sidelines puking. They're not falling over. Those are some of your red flags things where you're going to want to go ahead and send them to the ER. So when you're talking about going through this, and Daniel teed it up for signs and symptoms specifically, but going through this is going to be a team effort. And Joe, you touched on something that's super important that I was going to mention as well. You're going to want to have a plan in place. You don't want to just willy-nilly be trying to screen these out on the sidelines if you don't have that person. And same thing with practices. So more concussions happen in practice than they do actually in game. And when do we not have coverage? Usually at practices. So you're going to want your team, and that includes your players. So not just your team of coaches, but the actual team itself, to have a little awareness of what these symptoms are and hold each other accountable. So the best way that I think that you can convey this to the team and to yourself as a coach is to have a specific checklist. That way it holds you accountable. You're less likely to do the like, oh, in the moment, don't want to take this kid out. If you have a specific checklist that you're running them through, then that's going to make it a lot harder for you to be like, oh yeah, I didn't see anything. Because at that point, you're going to have to very intentionally neglect what you're seeing. And that becomes a lot harder when you're holding yourself accountable to these specific things that you're checking off. So at the top of that checklist, if in doubt, sit them out. If you took that training, I'm sure that's part of it. This next year, I'm hoping that they have this updated consensus statement information in that annual training that's required from coaches. So if you usually kind of click through it and just go through the motions, you might pay more attention this year. I don't know for sure that they'll have this updated information, but it might be worth kind of paying more attention to, because there's some good stuff in there as far as let's get them back to playing sooner. So that's something that you may have thought was going to go the opposite direction, and that's not the case. So have
there's
a checklist.
Mix in there, by the way, of anybody who has done this probably remember it. So there is the poor girl, Emily, who has to apologize to her team. She's very sad. She's going to miss the championship game of her senior year. Emily has been in this thing for 15 years. Emily is currently eligible to be president of the United States. She's been in the thing forever. That part is like outdated, but there is definitely some stuff even watching it in the last couple of years that is updated, and they're not rolling it out the way that if you go get a job and they make you watch the old bloodborne pathogens video that they made us watch. That's just terrible.
Okay? Yes, at every job.
They are putting NFHS is putting more effort into this than that. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Maybe people will pay more attention to it now. But that whole having an abundance of caution when it comes to concussions is really the best route. Like, no, we don't want to see an athlete sit out, but truly, when in doubt, sit them out is the best approach if you're unsure at all, and then get them checked out by someone who is better at screening it, better at assessing it, and then maybe they come back to practice the next day. It was false alarm type thing, but much better to have that than the other way. So in this checklist, step 1, every school should have an emergency action plan, an EAP. That shouldn't necessarily be on your shoulders as a coach, but if you don't have one, if you're not sure what to do, who to talk to, who to send the kid to in the event of a possible injury, probably should know that first. I think that's pretty general common sense. Let's know what to do. But step 2 is going to be educate the staff, educate the team, have some kind of buddy system in place. It doesn't have to be big and in depth. You don't want to scare the kids. Like you said, you have kids that are like, sometimes they're telling about every hit that they see, and you have some that are trying to hide it. So you just want to keep it fairly light as far as like what you're telling them, just something to be aware of. And let them know. So if you do have an athletic trainer or you have someone that will screen the kids, just let them know that if they get pulled off to the side or pulled to a tent or pulled to the locker room during a game, it doesn't mean they're out of the game. So don't get mad. Don't get all irritated about how you're not going to go back in for the second half because you were pulled for an evaluation. That is truly just so that we as healthcare providers can get a better picture of what's going on. Because I've made the mistake of trying to screen a kid for a concussion right there on the sidelines. Game's going on right here, team's right here, bleachers are off to the side. And of course, everyone in the stands are watching like, oh, what is she checking? What are they going to do? Is he okay? And that puts a lot of pressure on the kid. It didn't help that the kid had ADHD, which is another like tangent that we could get into, but he was distracted by them. So it was giving me some false information. So if I didn't know that about the kid, if I wasn't familiar with him and that team, I could have set him up for a concussion because he was getting too distracted by everything going on around him. But I knew he had ADHD it was luckily right before halftime, so I was able to, after that initial screen him again more quietly, and he was okay. But that's something that I see happen a lot, is we try to do all these screens on the sideline so we can just get him right back on the field, and you're probably not getting the best information, skewing it one way or the other. So just giving the kids the heads up that if a coach or a trainer pulls them off to the side and takes them to the locker room or takes them to a quieter place, it doesn't mean they're out of the game. It means, hey, we want to make sure that you're okay and that it is safe for you to return to the game. So I think having them have that information before you get into 7-on-7, before you get into full-on practice, is going to be very beneficial for how they respond to that interaction with either the designated coach or the ATC that's available. So I think that's really important. Step 3 would be, if you're like, we kind of talked about this, but a lot of the rural schools around here don't have an ATC. And like you mentioned, Joe, it's kind of one ATC among either multiple schools or all the sports. They definitely don't typically have multiple, which schools with an athletic trainer are 4 times more likely to catch concussions. That doesn't mean that those schools are having 4 times more concussions. It just means that they know what to look for. So having a designated staff member, so they can be your concussion awareness specialist, like give them some fancy title and have them know the CRT6. It's one sheet of paper, it is front and back, but it gives you the red flags, like when to call an ambulance and other things to be looking for. So I don't know if this is in the NFHS thing, but
I don't think so. I'm not familiar with it.
It's super simple. So I'll go over it real quick because, like I said, it's super simple. Red flags are going to be neck pain or tenderness, hard time holding your head up type things. Seizures, like fits or convulsions, loss of vision or double vision, loss of consciousness, of course. Just go ahead and send them to the hospital. Increased confusion or deteriorating conscious state, so they're becoming less responsive or slower to respond. Weakness or numbness in more than one extremity, so both arms, both legs, an arm and a leg, anything like that. You're like, if it's more than a stinger on one arm, you need to go to the ER. Repeated vomiting, increasing headache, increased restlessness or starting to be combative, or visible deformity of the skull. So, some of these are common sense ones, but it goes without saying, sometimes you got to point out the obvious. And it gives some like remember tips on there, just, basic first aid, stabilize their neck if you need to, if it looks like they got hit that hard or they're unconscious, making sure that they have an airway, pulse, those living things. And then other visible cues. So on the back side of this paper, visible cues that suggest a concussion. Again, the loss of consciousness or responsiveness, lying motionless, falling unprotected. So just that collapse, like with no protective response, disoriented or confusion, limited response or inability to respond to questions appropriately, a dazed or blank, vacant look, slow to get up, the seizures, unsteady on feet, facial injury. So very similar to the red flags, but those are your, like, what can you see visibly? So here's the symptoms of suspected concussion. So the physical symptoms are going to be headache, pressure in the head, balance problems, nausea or vomiting, drowsiness, dizziness, blurred vision, more sensitive to light, more sensitive to noises, fatigue or low energy, don't feel right is a common one they say, neck pain. They may have changes in emotion, so that can come across as they're more emotional, more irritable, they feel sad, or they feel nervous or anxious. I feel like those emotional ones are commonly not thought of very much because, of course, if they're being taken out of the game or they've had a hit, then they're going to show some frustration. So you do want a cool down period. This is when at practice versus in the game can be a little bit different because at practice you have 5 minutes to take their helmet and just let them chill and see if their symptoms progress once that adrenaline comes down. In a game, you're wanting to get them right back on the field. But you really need to take that, like I said, 3 to 5 minutes to let them see if those symptoms are going to surface. They can also have changes in thinking. So difficulty concentrating, difficulty remembering things, feeling slowed down or feeling in a fog. So the SCAT 6, so most people are using the SCAT 5. SCAT 6 is more of that new assessment thing for usually healthcare providers or ATCs. But there's 5 questions that they've modified that you can ask. Where are we today? What event are you doing? Who scored last in this game? So if it's not at practice, or, maybe what were we running last that you were a part of? What team did you play last week or last game? And did your team win the last game? So they need to be able to answer those 5 questions, and they shouldn't be real slow to answer those. And that's, like I said, you can really just look at the back page of this CRT6, have your concussion awareness specialist coach kind of be familiar with this, carry it around in their pocket, whatever it may be. They'll get used to it pretty quick. But that kind of takes away that not having a provider on the field all the time.
I think we joke about everybody needs a title sometimes.
We do.
we do joke about that, but here is another opportunity to give somebody a title. Although probably if you don't have an athletic trainer on staff, you're probably at a school that everybody's got a title.
Right.
But somebody can take on one more title. It's probably, I would think this would be a good thing to hand to the senior most coach who is not the head coach, as long as you know that they can be trusted. But I wouldn't want that, if at all possible, to be the head coach, because the head coach gets distracted by so many things going on. Ideally not a coordinator, but just maybe you have an experienced JV coach who's been around for a long time but doesn't have like a ton of Friday night responsibility or something.
Yeah, it's got to be somebody that's got the moxie to stand up to the head coach, be like, look, man, here's what I saw. Because that can weigh on you as an assistant. I can speak to that personally of, it's our starting quarterback. I know this game is very important. I know what I just saw, but I am not going over there.
Yeah.
Because
I've gotten, and maybe there's some ideas for this, but I can think of times where I didn't, especially when I'm up in the booth and not like right there. But up in the booth, sometimes you can see something that the guys on the sideline may miss just because, it's on the far sideline or something. And I've been up there going, you need to get such and such out of the game, but I didn't tell them why. And I'm like, needs to be out of the game. And then I'm like, I know 100% my head coach is not going like, I'm just going to ignore him. I don't care if he's got a concussion. We're trying to win a game. Like, he's not doing that, like 100%. But we didn't have we should probably have and now I just say, it looks like he's got a concussion or something. Needs to be checked or something like that. But we should probably have a way to communicate that, especially down on the sideline, without making it super, like you said, Sam, like we get super combative now, as like, oh, I'm taking him out because he looks like he's got a concussion, and immediately everybody thinks like, well, that means he's out of the game. And then like, this wasn't a concussion, this was a knee, but first play of the game of our playoff game, our starting quarterback hurts his knee, and everybody's just like immediately tanks, right? It's like, oh my God, we just had a 2-hour bus ride, we get down here. This program that we're playing was definitely beatable this year, but they are like a legendary program. They're a little down. We could have had a shot. It ended up not happening. But but part of it was that as soon as that injury happened on the first play of the game, it was like, we don't want to tank the whole team by being like, got to get such and such out. He looks like, we need to check him for a concussion. So like, we probably need some, and that's something that like if you have a coach who's responsible specifically for that, could be like, look, this is how you handle it. Like, come to me, and like, somebody needs to come to me, and I will make, we have that, like you said, we have a plan in place. Not necessarily, like, I think you said that, the emergency plan is one thing. Like, the emergency plan is like, dude's knocked out, dude's vomiting. Like, we don't need a discussion right now. Like, it's decided. But when it's that situation, like you said, Daniel, like, somebody's going to have to, like, you got to know, hopefully our head coaches are not out there being like, but we do get hung up. We do get caught up. But like, having that plan in place where the head coach knows like, hey, if this person comes to me, or if any coach comes to me and says like, a code word. It's like, all right, time out, something. Get this taken care of.
Yeah, for sure. Second part of this, and I know we've already, much like we always do, we've already kind of pushed into this second question, but really, what is that plan of action on Friday night on the sidelines? And so you've already kind of talked, so push him off to our CRT6 specialist, right? Our guy with the new title. Let him evaluate. So I don't want to spend a ton of time there because this conversation can go on for 2 hours pretty easily. So have that guy. That should be your Friday night, probably your practice schedule as well. That's the plan. If it hits those big ones, just get them to the hospital, right? That's the pass out, and that's on the list. And so if you download and print out the CRT6, check out the back, and that's got all the red flags and the here's the bad thing. So I just realized I'm talking to my wife who's behind my monitor. So if you're watching the recording, it looks like I'm looking over here. It's because I am. I'm talking to her. So we'll kind of push past that on the Friday night.
Well, that's one other thing on it, because you mentioned like being able to stand up the head coach, but I'm just thinking, I'm thinking about this because I'm thinking like this is a really important thing. But the athletic trainer, for sure the athletic trainer, that's their job, but that's the person that's going to do the evaluation. But you also know that's the person that is trained for it. I feel like if you assign this to a coach, I wouldn't want to make it super public, like I don't want the kids being like, there's the concussion man. And I also definitely don't want the parents to know that, like, hey, the guy that's in charge of our concussions is not really trained for this.
Right.
He's just a coach that, no, he may have gone through the training, as we said, but he's not like, a medical professional. He's he's a PE teacher. He teaches health, teaches driver's ed. But that's kind of, actually, that probably has more than if he's a history teacher, but,
You do have to ride that line, though. I know exactly what you're saying, right? There's that perception of, well, who do you think you are saying my son can't play? Because the scout came to watch my kid who might be D2 this year or bump up to D1, right? Like there's always, and that's something that I wish we'd get away from, is that politicalization that, look, man, stuff happens. And so having a specialist. But I like what you said, Joe, about keeping it a secret. The kids don't even need to know.
Well, see, what my thinking is, what if he missed it and the kid plays the rest of the game, then the kid goes and gets evaluated Saturday morning and they say he's got a concussion. I don't want somebody coming back to this guy and being like, you should have taken him out of the game. And now there's like, potential, like that shouldn't be part of that position. But so that's where I'm thinking, that's one of the things I'm thinking, like, let's kind of have somebody who's responsible. We all should know. We all should go through we all should take the concussion protocol stuff seriously, and the NFHS, training that we have to do and everything. We all should pay attention to that. We all should know the signs. But having one person who's specifically like at the top of the food chain on that shouldn't be public knowledge necessarily, because there's a lot of things that go into it.
Exactly. Those are great points. So after the plan, after the return to play, or so that's kind of where I want to get into next as we push through here. So Sam, kind of what should that look like? I'm sure the type of concussion matters, right? How severe it is changes that. So kind of that day 1 to day 7 indicator, because I've had a kid come back after 7 days, and I've had some that can't come back for 21 days. What does that look like for me as a coach? What should we be doing post-concussion Saturday morning? Kind of what does that look like for everybody?
Yeah, so, and maybe we can post a link or post some kind of resource after this, but there's a return to learn strategy and a return to sport strategy. And so pretty much until the kid can return to class, they don't need to be returning to sport. Now, caveat there, that doesn't mean they're sitting on their butt in a dark room. So there used to be like cocooning therapy, or like, you were told to go sit in the dark, quiet, and stay there until your head didn't hurt anymore. We're not doing that crap. So you have about 24 hours to not do a lot. Maybe you're wearing sunglasses, like if you have some light sensitivity. Maybe you're staying out of chaotic areas like hallways. So maybe you're spending one day at home, but then your butt's going to get on a bike and you're going to start getting your heart rate up. you're going to push into symptoms. So if you start and you have a 3 out of 10 headache and I put you on the bike, I'm going to let you get up to a 5 out of 10 headache before I pull you off of it. Having that increased heart rate is going to help get inflammation out and help you recover quicker and recover fully. Sitting around doing nothing for 2 weeks at a time is just going to make you feel miserable for longer. So that's where one of those newer, the research, the technology we have to check biomarkers in the brain and to assess how people are doing, not just by subjective report, but by like true, how's your brain responding to the things that we are asking you and the things we are asking you to do, shows 24, 48 hours, and we're getting you back to doing something. Does that mean you're practicing out in the heat with the team with a helmet on? Probably not on day one, but you can get there a lot quicker than you could previously. So kind of back to our coach specialist, severity does matter to some degree, because how severe it is probably depends on how severe symptoms are and how much we're going to push into those. But everyone on the staff need to know what to look for beyond what that CRT6 shows. That gives you kind of those key things. But when you're talking to a player, you're not just checking for like outrageous behavior as far as change in behavior or focus. So if they're shaking their head a lot, if they're holding their nose, if they're going to the wrong sideline, that one's pretty obvious. But those personality, like, you probably know your players. And if you don't, their teachers do, because you see them in athlete mode all the time. So this is something that has to go beyond coaches a lot of the time. It has to go into the classroom as well, because teachers are going to know their behavior too, and they're probably going to recognize that behavior change. So it doesn't all fall on the shoulders of your new specialist, but that's where that checklist comes in. Like, truly have a checklist, and that way it kind of takes the responsibility off their shoulders. Yes, they have the responsibility of checking that athlete, but if they check all the boxes on day one, day two, they may present with symptoms they didn't have on Friday night. So that's where some of that, like, I still agree with you as far as it doesn't need to be public knowledge, and they don't need that burden of, oh, well, you didn't say my kid had a concussion, and, you know, Saturday they woke up and they were feeling terrible and couldn't focus on anything. But it is important to know that these symptoms can surface the next day, especially when you're talking about afternoon practice or late night practice. But moving forward through the return to learn, 24 hours, you may have a day at home. After that 24 hours, we want to start getting them doing things. So limited screen time up front. So if they're teachers, you can do accommodations without like having to go through a full paperwork process. The just making the teachers aware that they may have sustained a concussion, and it'd be beneficial for them to look at a paper instead of their computer screen that day in class. Try not to make them take a test today. So like basically keeping cognitive load pretty low to where they're not having to use a lot of executive level thinking, because that's the part of the brain that usually gets injured the most, and being aware of their symptoms. So let them know if they start having a hard time seeing, take an eye break, because we want them to go through their regular day as easy as or as soon as possible. So if they're spending the rest of the week at home, that's going to delay their return to sport. So if they can get back to school the next day with accommodations, so maybe they get to wear their hat in class to block out the fluorescent lights. Maybe they get to wear sunglasses. Maybe they get to look at paper or not take notes. But just the fact that they're sitting in class, even though they're not participating, that's getting them back to their normal routine quicker than if they sat at home an extra day. So you got to think about the classroom aspect too. And when they can handle that, then they can start moving on through like the return to sport type stuff.
And that is all a part of the NFHS trainings, the return to learn, return to sport, and that there's a lot more in there with moving through a progression. I'm pretty sure if I remember all this correctly, unless if I don't remember it correctly, then it's because our athletic trainer is doing it already. But we go through that, getting them active as soon as possible and getting them, and then working them through, they're not, I remember at one point, you mentioned sometimes it takes 21 days. I've lost kids. Now, I'm sure that they're extreme, but we've lost kids for a season because, and all that, this is a long time ago, but literally all that they were doing was sitting around. And, getting checked out once a week. Doctor would go, nah, that was it. That was it. That was once a week. Go get checked out. Nah, still not good. It's like, what are we doing for it? Well, it's just nothing. They weren't locking them in a closet. We haven't done that in a long time, I don't think. But, that was the thing, was they were just out.
Yeah, luckily I've not dealt with anything too long, but I can definitely see there's still that weird, people don't know how to act and they don't know what to do. And a lot of people are afraid to be the one that gets in trouble, right? And then you have the doctors who, if they went in with a hangnail, they're out for 2 weeks anyways. So that doctor, you're definitely not getting that player back for a while. Like, oh, you had an actual injury now? I have to go further than 2 weeks because I give 2 weeks for everything. So
that was the as I worked on a military, essentially with a military base in the county. And if those kids went to the military doctors, done.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You got a bruise? Oh, 2 weeks. That's a pretty bad bruise.
Unfortunately, they can tend to blanket treat some things. So that's the true place where like everyone's afraid of getting their butts chewed, right? Like, I can't believe you would do that. So yeah, return to play is a little different than even what I was taught my first year. Get the kids active, get them back out there, get them back with their buddies. Like Sam said, get them back on the practice field. That doesn't mean give them a helmet. That doesn't mean they're cleared for contact, but get them back out there, standing around, have them sending some electricity through those neurons, right? Like, we need them out there thinking about football even. That's okay. Cognitive load. Hey, look at that PT 2.0. Dosing. Load things up, even your brain. Last part here. And unless you have it.
But before we go on to the last part, just to make this more conceptual and easier to apply, I'm going to take you through what a return to sport could look like. They're doing great in classroom day one. We'll call it a mild concussion. All concussions are still a brain injury, but we'll call it a mild concussion. So day one is going to be relative rest. Again, that doesn't mean just sitting around doing nothing. Maybe they sleep in, maybe they go to school late, maybe they miss first hour, but they still make it to school to get back into that normal routine. And we're avoiding screens that first 24 hours.
And we're talking first 24 hours. So this is a Friday night. We're talking about Friday Saturday, not Monday.
Saturday. Right. So if this happens in a game instead of practice, then Saturday they can kind of sit around and not do a whole lot. Again, that doesn't mean sleeping all day long, because then we're going to be concerned that it's more of a serious concussion if it's outside their normal behavior. So trying to get back to a normal Saturday, avoiding screens shouldn't, it's hard because they want to be on their phones, but they're not having to do classwork. Day two, let's say their symptoms stayed steady day one, we're going to progress to day two, and that's when we want to get them to a 40 to 60% of their heart rate max. I calculated some of these for y'all. For that age group that you'd be in, you'd be at a 80 to 110 heart rate. So walking, like a brisk walk, biking, and this is where you're going to allow a 2-point increase in symptoms. So, tell them, pay attention to how you feel. If it starts to get worse and then it gets a little bit worse, rest for a little bit. They're going to stay at day two. So they're going to stay at that 40 to 60% heart rate physical activity until they can get through it without their symptoms rising. Now, caveat to this is their symptoms can rise to that. If it goes away within an hour, then we can progress to day three. So they get a little bit of elevation in their symptoms, but it doesn't linger. We can go to day three. So that's when you can start sport-specific training in a modified environment. So usually away from the team to keep impact risk down, but maybe they have a few players around them, walking through some drills, or maybe they're doing some whiteboard work. Whatever it may be, they can start that sport-specific training. They do great with that. They're able to increase their heart rate to that more like 60 to 70 range without symptoms. We're moving on to day four. You do not want to move past day three until they can get to that 70% of heart rate max without ongoing symptoms. So again, they might have symptoms below a 5 out of 10, but if they're at 2 out of 10 and they bump up to a 5 out of 10, that's a point too high. They're going to have to repeat day 4. So, or repeat day 3. So then day 4, they can start practicing with the team, not contact, but they can be doing drills, decision making, and physical intensity can bump up to what it normally would be for like a non-contact day. Day 5, you can be full contact in practice. Day 6, they're returning to sports like a normal day. With step 4 or day 4 through 5, you still want to be monitoring the kid because you don't want to just return them to those non-contact drills and assume that they're doing fine. You're still keeping eyes on them a little more than you would had they not just sustained an injury to make sure that their decision-making is in line with what it would be non-concussed. So as long as they're kind of running plays the same way they were before, or their coordination is about the same as it was before, then you're probably safe to move up to that next one, as long as they're not having symptoms.
And it seems like that would be an important point where even if you're a medical trainer, to be able to communicate with their position coach and who's worked with them every day for the whole season and just say like, hey, was anything off today? Or was everything, when you get to that day 4, day 5, and it's like they came to you, you went through, walkthroughs or whatever, they went through non-contact stuff. Was everything normal? Because to me, that's the person who's going to know, okay, this person is behaving sport-wise normal. Like I know what my offensive linemen look like on a normal sports day. They're goofy as hell, but I can tell the difference between just being goofy and there's a problem.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because if they have a history of migraines, or if it's in the fall or spring when allergies are elevated, they may have headaches anyway. So that's where you have to really pay attention to, are those symptoms rising with physical activity, or are these symptoms they would have had anyway? And do they have ADHD? Do they have depression? Do they have any of these other things on board before the concussion? Because 1, it can elevate those things, but 2, it can start to give you some depressive-like symptoms, some fogginess, just not feeling right. So I think the position coaches knowing their players is super helpful, but also just checking in and say, hey, are you having any brain fog, or do you feel all right? Does anything feel off? Because usually it's hard to describe, because it's like just your brain doesn't feel right, but you can't explain why. It's not a true like general lack of focus or fogginess. It's just I don't feel right, or I feel off. So those are some terms you might hear these athletes say that they can't really express why they don't feel right, but they don't feel right. And so you get some interesting descriptions because there's not a good way for them to express how they feel. So don't brush those things off, especially if you know that they've had a hit that could have caused a concussion.
So return to play, return to learn, then return to play. You can push into it, but repeat day 3 if they are going to have these symptoms that keep flaring up, essentially, right? That's the easiest way to put it. Could get them back in 7 days. You could repeat day 3 for 10 days and then get them back whenever they get through the rest of those days. So seems like it's pretty simple. Even no matter what level of coaching you're at, you should be able to pretty much go through that. And just if you're honest with your kids and they're honest with you, it's like it should be pretty simple. Last question here. And I know this one, Joe, we've talked about this before because of JDFB weight room and the fact that, you've discussed, there's things built into it that help to mitigate concussions for teams. So that is the question. And Sam, we'll have you kind of go first here and just talk about what can we do. It's off season right now. So what can I add tomorrow and carry throughout the rest of the spring into the summer that would help me eliminate or lower that number of concussions next football season?
I feel like this is the question that everyone tunes into this episode for. It's like, how am I going to prevent my player from being off the field for a concussion? Which we all love to prevent every injury that everyone has.
You think, but a lot of coaches don't think that there is a way to prevent it. So if you tuned in not knowing that you can prevent it, you can prevent it. Not completely, but
well, I can't complete a car wreck either, but I still take precautions to try to. And most of the time that works out. So yeah, there is prevention in place. We finally have research that shows there are true ways to mitigate the risk of injury. No, you're not going to get rid of it completely. Yes, someone could still ram their head into your player's head, and no amount of prevention is going to stop that situation. But you can have players whose bodies are better suited to prevent that injury, and just general awareness of their bodies that's going to prevent that injury. So neuromuscular reeducation and proprioception are the two ways that you can prevent injuries. I got to talk to Joe a little bit about this before we went on the podcast about what all his strengthening included, and several of the things that he mentioned are things that are going to help prevent concussions or injuries in general. But strengthening is going to be number one priority, of course. But how are we going to strengthen specifically? You want a strong neck. Hey, I give you something fun to Google. If you Google neck exercises, they look ridiculous and the setup is stupid and you're going to get a lot of laughs in the weight room. But buy some resistance bands, put them around the rig, and start bobbing your head all sorts of goofy ways, and you're going to get a stronger neck. There are some other ways too. Like you can do some head lifts in a hands and knees position, holding it up like with that band anchored. So definitely getting some neck strengthening on board is going to be big time for preventing injuries. Like we mentioned earlier, if someone has a concussion, they probably also have whiplash. So you can prevent the head moving so much if your neck is strong enough to stabilize your noggin. So
we just on that one real quick. Well, Chris Lawyer, who writes our JDFA weight room, I don't come up with this stuff. One of his things was not using. So when I was in high school, we did neck work. We had the big Nautilus 4-way neck machine, but that takes up 90% of the weight room. But then we would do, somebody, pressing somebody, a partner assisted. And one of Chris's things was that the partner assisted, you were very often either getting not enough resistance or more likely too much resistance to have it really be the level of effectiveness. You don't want this to be like we used to put the head down, we'd strain to get up, and it's like a isometric movement at some point. And that's not exactly what we want in this. So the things you're talking about with the bands or some weight, a little bit of weight or something is better than the partner assisted.
Yeah, it just allows you to be more objective about it. The bands, not as much, because of course how much tension you put on them depends on how much weight there is against them, but it's a good place to start. And you could actually make it a competition that would entertain the kids, just because everything's a competition, right? But you can actually have them lay down and have them lift their head off the floor just enough that they have the weight of their head. And it doesn't take long before the necks start trimming. Even your strongest athletes, their heads are heavy, and holding it up with their neck just like that can be challenging. So just seeing who could hold it up the longest would be a great introduction to, you need to get your neck stronger. You should be able to hold this for 30 seconds without it being an issue. In therapy world, it's at least 10 seconds, but you'd be surprised at how many people are like straining at that 10-second mark.
Daniel, the weight of the helmet, when you start practice, if you have not been doing any neck work, especially, just the weight of the helmet added and walking around with the helmet on. But I think that if we do it right, we don't start out getting, the weight of the helmet getting into us. We already have that. The time to start building the strength is not when we start wearing the helmet and going into contact. We probably should have done that beforehand.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's future planning, if nothing else. I don't know what you'd call that, writing a book, but foreshadowing. Work out. You're about to hold that helmet up for the rest of the season. That's a good selling point, I guess.
Yeah, that neck soreness from not doing anything and then throwing a helmet on is legit.
I can remember the towel around my forehead while some guy held it down, and I tried to do neck crunches, right?
More often than not, the guy was trying to make me miserable, and then I was going to turn around and make him miserable.
Yeah, they were trying. Who's the strongest? It was not a who can get the other guy stronger competition. It was, can I assert my dominance on you during your pitiful neck exercises. I was born with this head width neck, so I win those like 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I won a lot of those.
Yeah.
Anyway, next strength glory days.
Yeah, for sure. So resistance bands, and then So Joe, what are the things that you tie into JDFB? What are some of the auxiliary neck stuff?
We've four-way neck movements. And just you said, it's you gotta it's awkward. There's not like a really, unless you have like the four-way neck machine, which is again like big, bulky, and it's kind of the track of it isn't great. It feels like,
right.
But like very unlikely that you have that sitting around in your weight room, and so it's like it's gonna be a little awkward. I feel like there's a lot of things that the movement is going to be awkward, but it's worth doing. It doesn't take a lot. We'll have them lay. So we have them lay with their head off the bench, and it'll be like a 5-pound weight just kind of resting, and they're moving through that range of motion, slow, not like they want to do that. Like no. But it doesn't take much.
Speaking of concussions.
Yeah, well.
Awesome. Sam, is there any other exercises, any other things we can do? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just for the neck. I love the hanging off you could just use the helmet for a while to put the helmet on and do those isometric holds. And you could do that laying on your back with like the end of the bed or the end of the bench at shoulders and head hanging off. And you could also do that laying on your stomach, because that's going to work different muscles holding your head up versus up.
Right.
Directions. You can actually do that side lying too, now that I think about it. Do some.
Yeah, that's our 4-way.
Yeah.
Our 4-way is left side, right side, back, front.
I don't know if you meant with the bands on the 4-way or.
Oh, no. We actually don't use the bands.
Gotcha.
Mainly because I haven't been in many weight rooms that actually have enough bands.
Right.
So it's easier for us to just use either, relative. I like the idea of throwing a helmet on.
Yeah, helmet would work perfect.
Because that's a lot easier. So we usually just kind of balance like a 5-pound weight. But a helmet would be a much easier fit.
It's around your head.
We all had the old, we know the old, like the furry leather, the leather with the fur and it's like the chain. That's not as.
Anyway.
But again, hard to have enough of those laying around, even if it is, even if.
But everyone has a helmet.
Yeah, I think throwing a helmet on is a great idea.
That'll work.
Get a helmet with no face mask so you don't break any rules. I don't know if there's rules. Massachusetts, I know they probably have rules. They can't do anything.
Oh, for putting a helmet on. Makes sense. Thoracic, spine, and low back are going to be, of course, your neck's attached to your spine. So just get that whole thing stronger. So for thoracic spine, I feel like people have a little bit of a harder time. But like your bent over rows, some single arm bent over rows as well, pendlay rows. You can hold a weight like a sandbag weight and do some basically upper body crunches. So instead of using lower abdominals, you'll want to break more at like the bottom of the ribs and then extend back. You can do that sitting on a bench, just holding some weight.
Like a stability, would a stability ball work for that?
Yep.
Probably.
Yeah, stability ball, wall ball type things. Those are all good to like just bear hug, and then you can get that thoracic spine. Yep. And then low back, of course, GHD, reverse hypers, even isometric holds, like in the clinic, because, Joe and I talked about this as far as equipment availability. Most gyms don't have enough GHDs if they have one at all, but they might have some of the like Nordic back extensor type things. But in the clinic, I'll use a wedge or a stability ball, like a yoga ball, and have people lay over, like have their hips over it, and then do an isometric hold that way. And then you can also lay over like an athletic table. I don't think a bench would be high enough. There might be a way to MacGyver it, but laying over an athletic training table or even a counter where you can grip it, get your body on it, and then lift both legs up behind you. And that's going to get that reverse hyperextension to get your low back really fired up and stronger. The the last piece here for really good prevention is going to be that more proprioceptive changing and just having that awareness of where your body's at in your surroundings. So things like reverse lunges, because you're not going to look back and see where you're lunging to. So that's where that backwards, you have to know where your legs are. You have to be aware of your body and what it's doing. So reverse lunges are good, like a single leg cone pickup or cone taps, where you're kind of like a single leg RDL, but you're tapping to a specific point, trying not to knock the cone over or trying to set it down on a specific point so that you're having to be more precise in your movements. Single leg, lower extremity cone taps. So stand on one leg, tap different cones with the other leg. So you're getting some dynamic movement and having to intentionally place a foot to a target. I personally love Blaze Pods. If you guys could get them as a sponsor, that'd be great. But Blaze Pods are super fun.
Well, Buffalo Trace doesn't seem to be calling back, so it's time to move on.
So maybe go the athletic route and get some Blaze Pods. But those are super fun because you can program them different ways, and it can be a cognitive and physical kind of activity. You can do it with like different colored stuff and just yell it out too, but that's not near as bright and colorful and shiny. Banded hip, multi-direction. So kind of think of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, like, the FMS was really popular for a while, but just taking one leg out to those 3 different directions and just having, again, that awareness. Tightrope walking. So have them walk across the field on a yard line and back like they're walking a tightrope. Again, you can make it a competition. Whoever is able to do it without stepping off the line wins bragging rights for the days or something. Single leg, like crossbody reaches, where you stand on one leg and, high five your buddy for the day or whatever it may be. So just getting different movements, pistol squats, of course, that single leg or even single upper extremity movement. So like dumbbell bench press, bicep curls, anything that you can do to strengthen both sides equally is going to be helpful, because a lot of times when you use both, you tend to favor one over the other. And of course, the weak side's the side that causes you to get injury.
So I have to, Joe, is this where ladders fit in?
No.
Still no ladders. But I do the 5 dots. So the 5 dot thing that everybody has painted up in there. I've literally seen them painted on the floor every weight room I've walked into. That might be a little bit of an argument to keep those. We used them for foot speed, and I truly got good at, much like the ladders, though.
You get good at the dots.
You get where you're looking at the dots. But I do wonder, like, if you could keep people, if we could tie that in to keeping your line, maybe that is a way to move them. Sam probably doesn't. I don't know. Do you know what the 5 dots are? Do you know what I'm talking
about? I've seen them on several floors too, like in different clinics too. And it's probably stems from the FMS, because it used to be really popular. Like, this is going to prevent all your injuries.
It goes way further back than that.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. That's probably what FMS is built on. But they finally have enough research to be like, that doesn't help. But you made me think of, there's another really cool app, which is much cheaper than Blaze Pods. It's like $2.99, if not free on a good day. But it's called Clock Yourself, and it's super fun. But it could be a way that you start, and it's a warm-up, so you're getting that cognitive and physical thing going, kind of warming up the brain, warming up the body. But you can change it and layer it. So you can start with just, it will say the numbers of a clock, which also might help our high schoolers learn what a clock face looks like. But, if we want to talk about throwing it way back and aging. But so this app, she'll shout out a number on the clock, and you can play it in sequence the first couple times so they know what they're doing. But you tap your foot out to 1 and back, 2 and back, and so on. But then you can change it to months of the year. So she says January instead of 1. And then you can layer on coordination. So she might say 10 and 2, and you have to jump out. Or she might say double 5, and you jump with both feet. She might say center touchdown, and you touch the middle. But you can adjust how fast it does all this. And then you can layer on, like, it will say chest press or bicep curls. And so you're doing an upper body movement while also trying to move your feet to the points on the clock. So it can become really fun. It's really entertaining, but that might be a really good one to pitch.
Those would be good. You know, I know a lot of coaches like to do competition, as you mentioned, doing competitions. But like an end of the workout competition or something, or beginning of the workout competition. If you just added those in, you know, once a week or something. JDFP weight room has elements that you could definitely, you know, we do single leg RDLs, we do, you know, the bicep curls and the tricep extensions and all that sort of stuff, single leg, single arm, single whatever. But there's a lot of opportunities for some of this stuff to be added in different ways without killing your speed training with ladders and dots.
Right. I had a question, and Sam, you may be able to answer this, and Joe, I'm sure you've seen them. The Q collars are kind of the new thing going on. NFL players wearing them. We had some local players. Coach Shelley down at Stillwell, his son wore one this year, and it like applies pressure to your neck. And from what I understand, the science is it keeps resistance in the fluid from being able to flow away from your brain, and so it more of a cushion of fluid. So, do you know, Dr. Chamberlain, if that's something that's realistic? Is the science there? Have you read up on those at all? Is that something that coaches should go out and invest money in to try to eliminate concussions? And I would never say buying a piece of anything replaces just training to mitigate the risk. But is that yet another layer of protection we can add, just like all the Guardian caps and stuff that we're wearing for practice games now?
I haven't looked into them, but what you just said about it applying pressure, it honestly makes me think of KT tape, which I bet's a lot cheaper. Because a lot of the science behind KT tape is just you have this constant feedback of tape being on your leg because it has the stretch to it. So it's constantly giving you some sort of sensation. So you're more aware and you can better activate your muscles, like for a knee examples where you are often having taped. But I'm almost thinking if you could put a strip on each side. Obviously, don't wrap the tape around the neck. Let's not do that. But
thank you for that.
You're welcome. Common sense. It's not common. Got to help people out here. But putting just a short piece of tape on either side of the neck to add that little bit of lift that you're talking about, that pressure applied, may be worth experimenting with.
So I'll get back in touch with Coach Shelley. I know his son he wore it the first time and he came off and was like, Dad, it's so much better, because he was an inside linebacker, and we all know that their job for 100 years now has been run downhill and hit the dive, and they kind of play some teams that are still doing that. And he talked about like it just felt better. The impact didn't seem as bad. The science kind of makes sense. You basically just squeeze the jugular down, and now there's resistance. The blood can't get out as easily, and it creates that extra barrier. So maybe just another thing to add to the list. Do your own research. It's what I would say to no matter what you're trying to add to your program. Do that research and follow up. There's studies out there, I'm sure. They're trying to sell that. I think it's called a Q collar, if I'm not mistaken. So go check that out. I think that would be a good place to start if you're just looking for that extra piece. I don't know if KT tape would work or not. Yes, the idea is the same, but KT tape usually increases movement of fluid, right? And we're trying to decrease. Like it's literally a constriction on your neck. So I don't know that KT tape would work. I guess you could tape it real tight from side to side and apply pressure, but we'll see.
Lost me now.
There you go. Sam, any last bit of anything before we close? I know we're hitting like almost an hour and a half on this one, so it's a good one. I mean, you bring on this is a big time, right? And it's not something we talk about enough. We talk about power 25 times, on this podcast and every quick game and all these routes and X's and O's. I guess she said whatever.
She's over it.
It just booted her out. So she can jump back in if she has anything to add. All right, I think she's just going to jump right here and say it on mine. But
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm hung up on the KT tape thing now. I just, that's weird, and don't go tape people's necks. But
don't tape necks.
Don't tape necks. But the more I was thinking about the Clock Yourself app, something like that would be a really solid thing to incorporate, because, that just kind of came to mind as we were talking about it. And in the physical therapy world, we use it a lot because that type of reactive stepping and reactive response has a lot of evidence for improving. I mean, in the way I use it is for falls risk. But like I said, it has an athletic component to it, like to where you can layer it on there more. And so having it even just once a week, like you said, as a part of a warm up or, a end of workout would be really ideal, because you are having to react, which what is football? You're reacting to the players around you, and you're reacting to the play, and you're watching it unfold, and you're having to respond. So it really has the potential to increase reaction time. You're also getting that neuromuscular control and that reactive stepping. So, and you're having to multitask. So if you layer in the upper extremity movements while also having to respond to some lady shouting out a number on a clock or a month of the year, and stepping to it and coming back, or jumping to it and coming back, you're really incorporating a lot of different things that could be very beneficial in game. So something to consider.
Yep. So really the working out, it's almost like resistance training for your brain, but right, it's just cognitive load, thinking, multi-directional, right? So that's how we prepare our athletes to not ring their bell. Sweet. Well, Dr. Chamberlain, thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure. I don't know why your computer hates us, but yes, it's been great. Toe yoga, neck exercises. What will you bring next?
All the obvious things.
The world may never know. Joe, we'll go ahead and pay the bills here, and then we'll start closing out ourselves. Unless you have any last thing to say here on concussions.
I don't have anything to add on concussions. Don't get them; they're not cool. Stop running Oklahoma, where you just run headlong into each other. You're not proving anything. You're not solving anything. You're not accomplishing anything. You're just knocking kids out.
Right.
So stop doing that. That's my last thing.
But yeah, there's modified Oklahoma drills now. If you just need to say the word Oklahoma drill, I live here and we don't run it. I can't tell you.
What would you call it? Drill?
I saw it ran because I watched a kid walk off with a piece of his arm bone sticking out of the skin. It's not a good drill.
No.
It doesn't prove toughness.
Does not help. Does not help. Yeah, it does not. Yeah, it does not make you tough.
No,
makes your kids quit. Other than that.
So we'll pay bills and then jump on out of here. Jump over to join.joedanielfootball.com. Get access for $1. I think it's still the deal, as far as we know. 7 days access, and then you get into the good stuff, man. Lock it in for the summer and for the year. Just pay annual. Save your money. Jump in. Get platinum. Right, game film analysis is where it's at. That's the moneymaker. Unless you're using it for football education. So that's how I considered it when I got started, and I've loved it, and it's accelerated my football knowledge 10 years, maybe more now. Go through, learn a whole system, offense and defense, and you will know more than most coaches, because all they've learned is their one position and like 3 drills. So you'll be able to do so much more. Get it for the staff. It's a great program. Join.joedanielfootball.com. 4 defense packages, pistol power offense, whatever defense you want to run, whatever offense you want to run. It's all doable with those, with the words, the system, the lingo, the principles that you're going to get installed by the Joe Daniel football system. Chalkboard forums, come in, ask any question you want. It's year round. Joe, I logged on the other day because I got now I get notifications when someone posts on there, and I went to go say something, and every one of them says, Joe answered, Joe replied. So literally you're going to get an answer from Joe Daniel himself. He's going to get in there. He's going to tell you his piece, his 2 cents, what makes sense if you're running his system. And then there's going to be the other 3 or 4 coaches that are going to say whatever it is they have to say. They're going to put their piece on there. So you're going to get multiple perspectives. But the biggest thing for me is I noticed that Joe always answers. So you ask a question, you're always going to get a response from Joe. So instead of Twittering him or emailing, hit him up on the Chalkboard forums. Chalk Talks bi-weekly right now. Get back to weekly when we get into season. And then, like I said, that game film analysis. Send in your film. We'll hit you up with the low-hanging fruit and let you get better on the spot. You can immediately go correct it. Start recording your drills, and that way you can see if we're actually getting better at the thing that Joe or Con or whoever gets your film happens to point out. Cells are opening and closing. I'm going to say we're 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're probably post-February, so
last day of on a leap year, or maybe into March.
Yeah, offensive play caller system will be closed. How about that? Because that's not going until the last day of the month. So we'll be in March, at the end of March, opening up Game Film Masterclass, which is a deep dive into breaking down your game film, self-scouting, scouting your opponents, scouting yourself, scouting your opponents, using your game film, getting the most out of it. It's basically a workflow on what you do from Friday night until Sunday staff meeting to have it all broken down. And the big thing about it is it has a start and a finish, and it's a game film system so that you get all that you need to get from your game film and then be done with it, so that you're not wasting your weekend, so that you're not still watching film on Thursday night before a game. You watch the film, you watch your own film, watch your own game, get what you need, and then move on. Watch your opponents, watch your exchange film, get what you need, move on. And there is a certain value in it, even if you're, maybe a youth program who doesn't get film, getting opponent film, getting your own film, it's going to be hugely, hugely valuable for you. To doing that self scouting and a lot of it's kind of the same kind of thing we do in the game film analysis. So which is a key thing to have. So yeah, that'll be opening up towards the end of March.
Awesome. Social media, you can find me on Twitter/X. At some point, we got to drop the Twitter, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever.
On X, at Coach It just feels like a site that I wouldn't let my kids go to, which I wouldn't let them go to Twitter.
I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Well, I know who thought that was a good idea, but
yeah. At Coach Chambo, okay. Feel free to DM me, hit me up, comment on things that are there. That's fine. You can email me at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. I'll reply to you in the middle of the day. I don't care. That's my break from the real world, I guess, is emailing football coaches that want to talk about football. Joe is on Facebook at Joe Daniel Football, at Football Info on X, and then at Joe Daniel Football on all the rest of them, right? Instagram, TikTok, TikToker. You're helping the Chinese.
Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I think that's it. I'm not on the other stuff. I don't know what else there is.
There you go.
Quite honestly.
Sam is on Instagram at sam.c.dpt. And then I think it's the same one on X and Twitter. So if you haven't, Sam C. DPT is her on Twitter. So if you want to reach out to her and ask her concussion questions, she will gladly help you out. Adaptable PT is on, I think, the Twitter and the X. Once again, you can always just email her at it's adaptablept@gmail.com. That's the best place to reach out. Shoot an email, and I can see it too. Because I help with the emails some. No, I don't. So she can get them, I can get them. But yeah, so you can reach out to her if you have the concussion questions, if you have any questions at all, health related, even if you just need to talk about, hey, my mom fell down and her hip hurts, what do I do? Shoot the email. She will help. She's just like me, overly driven. She wants to help more people than we could ever hope to be paid to do. So we're available to you at any time. If this is your first time listening to Football Coaching Podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. You can find us on your favorite podcatchers, specifically Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you've been listening for a while, leave us a review on either of those sites. Apple Podcasts is the big money maker for all podcasts. So if you want to leave us one there, that'd be great. Look, if it's lower than 4 or 5 stars, hit us up. Let us know why. Let us know what we can fix. We're always, that's part of the military way for me. AARs. What am I doing wrong? Help me help you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football Coaching Podcast. Remember, coach simple, play fast, win.